also extremely curious. As I spoke, Diesel batted a paw at the tote bag. "No, Diesel, stop that." The cat threw a baleful glance my way. He stood, made a circle around Mrs. Long's chair, and then came back to his perch on the windowsill behind my desk. "Apparently, he understands a firm no when he hears one," Mrs. Long laughed. "Our dogs aren't always so compliant." "He isn't either," I had to admit. "Depends on his mood." I waited a moment for the mayor to speak again. When she didn't, I decided it was time to steer the conversation toward the reason for her visit. "I believe you wanted to consult me about some family documents." Mrs. Long picked up the tote and settled it in her lap. She delved inside and pulled out a large manila envelope. She leaned forward and placed it on my desk. A faint mustiness, overlaid with a whiff of mothballs, wafted out of the open end. "Inside that you will find a volume of a diary written by Rachel Afton Long. I forget at the moment how many times a great-grandmother she is, but she was born around 1820 and died in the mid-1890s, if I'm remembering correctly." I stared at the envelope before me, my excitement growing over the thought of handling such an old document. "How many volumes of her diaries survive?" I pulled open a side drawer of my desk and extracted a pair of cotton gloves. If I was going to be handling a book that was more than 100 years old, I had to be careful with it. "4," Mrs. Long replied. "I have glanced at them, but I find the writing hard to read. From what I could glean, however, I believe she started the diaries a few years before she married my husband's ancestor. The last diaries dated around 1875. She shrugged. "I'm not entirely certain. The handwriting is small and cramped, and I got a headache trying to decipher just one page of it." "I'll have a look at it," I said. I held up my hands to show that I was wearing gloves before I extracted the volume, sliding it carefully out of the envelope. I let it lie on the desk as I put the envelope aside and examined the diary's outward appearance. The cover binding of brown leather was cracked in spots and rubbed thin in others, and the spine was in similar condition. My nose twitched at the strong, musty odor. I hoped the diaries hadn't suffered water damage. "Where have they been stored?" I asked. "My son, Beck, discovered them recently in a trunk in the attic while hunting for something else entirely. I'd never seen them before, and I don't believe my husband was aware of their existence either." Andrew Beckwith Long, known as Beck to most, was an aspiring politician. His father, also an Andrew, had served 4 terms in the state Senate. Recently, however, he had announced he planned to retire when his current term expired. Everyone assumed that Beck would easily win his father's seat, but there appeared to be a strong opposition in the form of Jasper Singletary, a young firebrand who served on the city council. Singletary was openly ambitious, and he had been publicly less than complimentary about the Longs and their political legacy. "Are you and Mr. Long planning to add these to the collection of Long papers and memorabilia that we already have?" "Yes," Mrs. Long said. "They need to be better preserved than they have been. We have no idea how long they've been up in that attic, and there could be damage. None of us looked through them much because we were afraid to cause further problems. That's why I wanted to bring them to you." She paused. "I'm sure you're aware of the terrible times that Athena faced during the Civil War and the brief occupation by Union troops. If Rachel Long recorded any of that, her information might be useful to historians." I nodded. My knowledge of Athena during the Civil War was sketchy, but in elementary school we had heard tales of the depredations of the Union Army in the winter of 1863. Our teacher, Mrs. Bondurant, had seemed so old to us at the time, we figured she was speaking from personal experience. I discovered later, when I was older and possessed a better sense of a person's age, that Mrs. Bondurant was only 38.